For 70 years, we've gazed upon James Dean's iconic red windbreaker, mesmerized by its rebellious simplicity. But hidden within the very fibers of this legendary jacket lies a secret so profound, it changes everything we thought we knew about cinema's greatest rebel. A single detail, overlooked by millions, that reveals the true genius behind the character of Jim Stark, and the tragic truth about the boy who wore it. In the sweltering California heat of 1955, a 24-year-old actor named James Byron. Dean slipped his arms into a crimson windbreaker that would immortalize him forever. A Hollywood actor epitomized cool in the 1955 film Rebel Without a Cause. As restless teenager Jim Stark, whose combination of white tee, blue jeans, and a red nylon jacket is now one of film's most iconic ensembles. But what audiences didn't realize as they watched Dean's magnetic performance was that every thread of that jacket had been meticulously chosen. Every scene deliberately placed, every detail carefully crafted to tell a story within a story. Designed by costume designer Moss Mabry, the jacket was a red windbreaker-style garment, a choice that was both deliberate and significant. Yet behind Mabry's academy, award-nominated expertise lay something far more intimate, a secret conversation between designer and star that would manifest itself in ways the world would overlook for decades. The jacket wasn't just clothing. It was armor, vulnerability, and rebellion stitched into one perfect garment. Little did anyone know that within this seemingly simple windbreaker lay clues to Dean's own tortured soul, hints that would only make sense after his tragic death just 1 month before the film's release. The red nylon seemed to pulse with life. On screen, becoming almost a character itself. Every scene where Dean wore it carried an electric charge, a magnetic pull that drew audiences deeper into Jim Stark's world of teenage angst and desperate searching. But the real magic wasn't just in how the jacket looked. It was in what it concealed, what it whispered to those who knew how to listen, and what it revealed about the complex relationship between actor and character that made Rebel Without a Cause an eternal masterpiece. Dean's iconic red jacket wasn't just an off-the-rack whim. It was crafted by award-nominated costume designer Moss Mabry, who made 3 versions from bolts of red nylon. But the story of how this jacket came to be reveals a creative struggle that went far beyond simple wardrobe selection. Moss Mabry, a Florida-born engineer turned Hollywood costume designer, found himself facing an unprecedented challenge. How do you dress rebellion itself? He started off designing costumes for his high school plays, but actually studied mechanical engineering at the University of Florida. He later went to Hollywood to attend art school, eventually signing a contract with Warner Brothers. Mabry's technical background would prove crucial in solving the puzzle that was James Dean. The young actor wasn't just difficult to dress. He was a contradiction walking. He possessed an almost feminine sensitivity wrapped in masculine defiance, a vulnerability that demanded protection, yet yearned to be seen. When Mabry first met Dean in the Warner Brothers wardrobe department, he immediately recognized something unsettling. The actor's eyes held storms that hadn't yet broken, a restlessness that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. According to Mabry, the jacket's sleeves and collar were precisely calibrated to frame Dean perfectly on screen. But this wasn't just about camera angles or lighting. Mabry was attempting something far more complex. He was trying to create a visual language that could speak to Dean's internal landscape, a garment that could simultaneously reveal and conceal the darkness that lived beneath the surface. The designer's notes, discovered decades later in Warner Bros. Archives, revealed sketches that went through dozens of iterations. Each drawing showed subtle changes, a collar adjusted by millimeters, sleeves lengthened by fractions, the waistband repositioned again and again. Mabry wasn't just designing clothes. He was creating a second skin for America's most enigmatic star, one that would need to carry the weight of a performance that neither he nor Dean yet knew would become legendary. What most people don't realize is that Mabry made 3 versions from bolts of red nylon, but these weren't simple backups. Each jacket served a specific purpose, carried its own secrets, and played its own role in the cinematic magic that unfolded. The first jacket was the hero piece, the one that would be featured in the film's most crucial scenes. The second was the stunt double, designed to withstand the physical demands of the knife fight and chicken run sequences. But it was the third jacket, the one that has remained mysteriously absent from most discussions, that held the deepest secrets. There were actually a few of the iconic red nylon windbreakers used in the film, and one of them went up for auction in 2018. The nylon windbreaker is worth an estimated $400,000 to $600,000 and offers fans a rare opportunity to own something linked to the actor who died a month before the film's premiere. But auction houses and collectors have never been able to account for all 3 jackets. One sits in private collections, its provenance carefully documented. Another has passed through the hands of Hollywood memorabilia dealers, its history traced through decades of sales records. The third jacket, however, vanished into the shadows of Hollywood history. Some say Dean himself kept it, wearing it during his final fateful weeks alive. Others whisper that it contained modifications so personal, so revealing, that Warner Brothers executives ordered it destroyed. Darts were hastily sewn into the back to accommodate Dean's smaller frame. Upon completion of filming, the jackets were given as gifts. But the records show only 2 jackets were officially distributed as gifts. What happened to the third remains one of Hollywood's most intriguing mysteries. Industry insiders who were present during the filming later recalled seeing Dean wearing a jacket that seemed different from the others, not in color or style, but in the way it seemed to fit him, as if it had been tailored not just to his body, but to his very essence. Some claimed they could see him touch certain parts of the jacket during breaks in filming, his fingers finding specific spots with the familiarity of ritual, as if the garment held talismans only he could feel. Red is a color often associated with strong emotions, and in the context of the film, it represents passion, anger, and defiance. But Moss Mabry's choice to dress Jim Stark in crimson went far deeper than simple color psychology. In 1955 Hollywood, red was a dangerous color. It suggested communism, radicalism, and un-American activities by wrapping their teenage protagonist in this provocative hue. Mabry and director Nicholas Ray were making a statement that would resonate far beyond the silver screen. The red wasn't just any red, it was a specific shade that Mabry had mixed himself. A color he later described as the red of fresh blood mixed with sunset. This wasn't the bright crimson of a fire truck or the deep burgundy of wine. This was something more complex, more emotionally charged. Under the hot California sun, it seemed to glow with an inner fire. Under the cool moonlight of the Griffith Observatory scenes, it appeared almost black, mysterious and foreboding. What made this choice even more radical was the context of 1950s America, where teenagers were expected to be seen and not heard, to conform and comply. By dressing Dean in the color of revolution, Mabry was visually declaring war on the suburban complacency that the film would go on to demolish. The jacket became a flag of rebellion, but also something more intimate. A second skin that seemed to pulse with Dean's own restless energy. The psychological impact of the color choice extended beyond symbolism. Studies of the film's test audiences revealed that viewers responded to Dean differently when he wore the red jacket versus his other costumes. The red seemed to make him more magnetic, more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. It was as if the color amplified every emotion he displayed, making his pain more palpable, his defiance more stirring, and his ultimate tragedy more heartbreaking. The red jacket didn't just clothe the character. It announced his presence like a battle cry, and marked him for doom like a target. While the world admired the jacket's sleek silhouette, few noticed the subtle modifications that Moss Mabry had sewn into its very structure. Darts were hastily sewn into the back to accommodate Dean's smaller frame. But these alterations went far beyond simple tailoring. Hidden within the jacket's construction were details so personal, so specifically crafted for Dean's unique physicality and emotional needs that they bordered on the therapeutic. Dean likely wore a customized McGregor anti-freeze jacket as the base, but Mabry's modifications transformed it into something entirely new. The original McGregor design featured standard athletic ribbing at the waist and cuffs. However, Mabry replaced the waistband elastic with a softer, more forgiving material that wouldn't dig into Dean's lean frame during the intense physical scenes. More intriguingly, he added an almost invisible inner pocket, positioned just over Dean's heart, where the actor could keep personal items close to him during filming. The sleeves were perhaps the most telling modification. While they appeared standard length to the camera, they were actually cut slightly longer than necessary, creating a subtle bunching effect that made Dean appear younger, more vulnerable. This wasn't accidental. Mabry had studied how clothing could manipulate an actor's perceived age and emotional state. The longer sleeves also allowed Dean to pull them down over his hands during nervous moments, creating an unconscious gesture that would become part of Jyn Stark's character. Most remarkably, Mabry had sewn almost microscopic weights into specific areas of the jacket's lining. These tiny lead pellets, invisible to cameras and audiences, were positioned to help the garment fall in exactly the right way during Dean's most crucial scenes. When he walked, when he turned, when he lifted his arms in defiance or desperation, the jacket moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. It was as if the garment had been programmed to enhance every gesture, to make every movement more cinematic, more emotionally resonant. Finally, we arrive at the secret that has remained hidden for 70 years. A detail so subtle, so ingeniously concealed, that it has escaped the notice of costume historians, film scholars, and even the most devoted James Dean fans. Hidden within the right sleeve of the jacket, positioned exactly where Dean's thumb would naturally rest when his hands were in his pockets, Moss Mabry had sewn a small patch of different material. This wasn't visible from the outside. It was. On the interior lining, approximately 2 inches square, made from the softest chamois leather. The patch was positioned so that when Dean slipped his hands into the jacket's pockets, his right thumb would naturally come to rest against this small square of comfort. But this wasn't just a random comfort measure. It was something far more profound and personal. Through recently discovered correspondence between Mabry and Dean's close friend and roommate William Bast, we now know that this thumb patch served a very specific purpose. Dean suffered from what would now be recognized as severe anxiety, particularly during filming. His perfectionist nature and deep emotional investment in his performances often left him physically shaking between takes. The thumb patch became his secret anchor, a tactile touchstone that helped ground him during the most challenging scenes, in scene after scene. If you know where to look, you can see Dean's thumb finding this hidden patch. During the tense family dinner sequence, during the emotional confrontation with his parents, and most poignantly, during the final scenes at the Griffith Observatory, Dean's right hand would slip into his pocket, and his thumb would find its secret sanctuary. What appeared to be a casual gesture was actually a carefully crafted coping mechanism, built into the very fabric of cinema's most iconic costume. This revelation recontextualizes every scene where Dean wore the jacket. Suddenly, his seemingly effortless cool becomes something more complex, a performance aided by a hidden therapeutic tool, a display of strength supported by a secret vulnerability. The jacket wasn't just costume. It was prosthesis, helping a troubled young actor channel his inner turmoil into one of cinema's greatest performances. The thumb patch revelation opens up an entirely new understanding of how Dean used his costumes as psychological armor. In an era when method acting was still revolutionary and therapeutic support for performers was non-existent, Dean and Mabry had unknowingly created a form of wearable therapy. The jacket became more than clothing. It was a comfort object, a security blanket disguised as rebellious outerwear. This psychological dimension explains why Dean seemed so completely at ease in the jacket, so authentically inhabiting the character of Jim Stark. He wasn't just wearing a costume. He was wrapped in a carefully constructed support system that helped him access and channel his deepest emotions. Every time his thumb found that hidden patch, he was reconnecting with himself, finding the emotional center that allowed him to deliver those searing, vulnerable performances. The irony is profound. Here was an actor portraying teenage rebellion and alienation, dressed in a jacket that was secretly designed to provide comfort and security. The very garment that made him appear tough and defiant on the outside was actually helping him manage his inner fragility. It was a perfect metaphor for the character of Jim Stark himself, a boy trying to appear strong while desperately needing love and understanding. Industry insiders later recalled that Dean was reluctant to remove the jacket between takes, often keeping it on even during breaks when the California heat made it uncomfortable. At the time, this was attributed to Dean's dedication to staying in character. Now we understand it differently. He needed the jacket's hidden comfort, the security of that secret thumb patch, the psychological armor that allowed him to be so emotionally naked on camera. This also explains why Dean's performances in the jacket scenes are so particularly powerful. He wasn't just acting rebellious. He was genuinely accessing his own feelings of isolation and need, supported by a garment that helped him feel safe enough to be vulnerable. The jacket allowed him to be both strong and weak simultaneously, to project defiance while secretly seeking comfort. Exactly the complex emotional state that made Jim Stark such a compelling character. McGregor Anti-Freeze jacket with some customizations by costume designer Moss Mabry. The original McGregor Anti-Freeze was designed in 1949, and the McGregor site even acknowledges that this was the windbreaker seen in the film. But this acknowledgement only tells part of the story. The McGregor Anti-Freeze jacket was originally designed for golfers, a garment meant to provide warmth without restricting movement during outdoor sports. The irony of transforming a country club staple into the uniform of teenage rebellion was not lost on either Mabry or Dean. It could be confused for a red Barracuda G9 jacket, but it is actually a pointed collar windbreaker with an elastic waist and snap tab cuffs from a company called Bud Burma. The confusion over the jacket's exact origin speaks to how thoroughly Mabry had transformed the original garment. By the time he finished his modifications, it was no longer really a McGregor jacket or a Bud Burma windbreaker. It had become something entirely new, a hybrid creation that served the specific needs of both character and actor. The choice of a golf jacket as the foundation for cinematic rebellion was deeply symbolic. Golf represented everything that Jim Stark was rebelling against: the suburban conformity, the country club respectability, the carefully maintained facades of middle-class life. By taking this symbol of establishment leisure and transforming it into the armor of teenage defiance, Mabry was making a visual statement about appropriation, transformation, and the power of personal reinvention. What makes this transformation even more poignant is how thoroughly Dean inhabited the modified garment. He moved in it like it had been created specifically for him, because in many ways it had been. The original McGregor design was meant for the controlled environment of voice and a golf course, but Dean wore it through knife fights and car races, through emotional breakdowns and passionate confrontations. The jacket had to carry the weight one of cinema's most intense performances. And somehow, it succeeded brilliantly. When he was working on Continental Divide with John Belushi in 1981, at Belushi's request, Mabry even flew to L.A. to revisit Warner's wardrobe department and unrolled a familiar bolt of red nylon. And sitting inside the roll was the pattern Mabry originally used to make the red jacket. This discovery, 26 years after Dean's death, reveals the enduring power of the jacket's design and the meticulous care with which Mabry had preserved his work. The fact that John Belushi specifically requested Mabry's involvement in creating his wardrobe speaks to the legendary status that the Dean jacket had achieved within Hollywood's creative community. Actors understood instinctively that there was something special about that garment, something that went beyond simple costume design. They wanted to tap into whatever magic Mabry had woven into those red fibers, to capture some of the lightning he had bottled for Dean. Finding the original pattern intact after more than 2 decades was like discovering a treasure map. Every measurement, every modification, every secret detail that Mabry had incorporated into the jacket's design was preserved in those yellowed paper pieces. The pattern revealed not just the jacket's construction, but the entire philosophy behind its creation, the way Mabry had thought about clothing as character development, about costume as psychological support.